The champagne glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor as Marcus's palm connected with my cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the elegant ballroom of the Grandview Hotel, where 50 of his company's top executives and their spouses had just witnessed the most humiliating moment of my life. "That's what you get for running your mouth," Marcus hissed, his face twisted with rage. "I told you to stay quiet tonight and let me handle the business talk." His colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their designer suits, their wives averting their eyes like they hadn't just watched a man strike his wife at a corporate celebration. But what none of them knew, what Marcus didn't know, was that I wasn't just some trophy wife who'd spoken out of turn. I was the silent partner who'd been funding his company's growth for the past 3 years. And tomorrow I was going to remind everyone exactly who really held the power. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should know better, hit that subscribe button right now. 7 years ago, I was Elena Moretti, a 28-year-old woman standing in my grandmother's dusty textile factory, surrounded by outdated machinery and decades of financial records that painted a picture of slow decline. Rosewood Fabrics had been the pride of our family for 3 generations, but by the time Nana passed, everyone assumed the business would die with her. Everyone except me. While my cousins fought over her jewelry and furniture, I saw something they missed. Rosewood wasn't failing because it was obsolete, it was failing because it had stopped innovating. The factory still had solid bones, the brand still had recognition among older designers, and most importantly, we owned something that had become incredibly valuable, authentic heritage in an industry drowning in mass production. I spent my inheritance and took out loans to modernize everything. New machinery, sustainable production methods, organic cotton sourcing, and partnerships with young designers who valued quality over quantity. The fashion world wasn't paying attention to little Rosewood Fabrics, which meant I could build something extraordinary while everyone was looking the other way. The transformation took 2 years of 18-hour days, sleeping in the factory office and learning every aspect of the business from thread counts to international shipping regulations. But by year 3, we were supplying materials to boutique brands that would later become household names. By year 4, luxury fashion houses were placing orders. By year 5, Rosewood Fabrics was generating revenue that would have shocked my grandmother. I kept the success quiet, deliberately. I still drove my old Honda, still lived in the modest house I'd inherited, still wore clothes I'd sewn myself from factory samples. The fashion industry loves a narrative, and my narrative was the hardworking granddaughter keeping tradition alive, not the businesswoman building a textile empire. That's how I met Marcus at a coffee shop near the university where I was taking night classes in international business. He was working late at Henderson and Associates, a consulting firm that helped businesses optimize their operations. He had no idea about my wealth when we started dating, which I found refreshing. Most men I met either wanted to rescue me from my struggling business or were intimidated by what they perceived as family money I hadn't earned. Marcus was different. He was ambitious but not greedy, intelligent without being condescending, and genuinely interested in my work. He'd visit the factory and ask thoughtful questions about our processes, our challenges, our growth strategies. He even helped me negotiate a particularly complex contract with a European buyer, using skills from his consulting work. After we married, I watched Marcus struggle with Henderson and Associates' limitations. The firm had brilliant people and innovative ideas, but they lacked the capital to scale. They'd lose contracts to larger competitors who could offer more comprehensive services, better technology, larger teams for complex projects. Marcus would come home frustrated, talking about the potential he could see in the company if only they had the resources to expand properly. He'd analyze their business model over dinner, explaining how targeted investment could transform them from a regional player into a national powerhouse. "We know exactly what these Fortune 500 companies need," he'd say, pacing around our kitchen. "We've got strategies that could save them millions, but we can't compete on execution because we're limited by our infrastructure." That's when I made the decision that would change both our lives. I approached Richard Henderson through intermediaries, using shell companies and investment funds to mask my identity. My proposal was simple. Rosewood Capital Management would provide the funding Henderson and Associates needed to expand, in exchange for a silent partnership and percentage of profits. The investment would remain anonymous. routed through established financial networks that made it impossible to trace back to me personally. Richard Henderson was desperate enough to accept funding from what appeared to be a prestigious investment firm, and smart enough not to ask too many questions about anonymous backers who clearly understood his business model. The transformation was remarkable. Within 3 months, Henderson and Associates had upgraded their technology infrastructure, hired 12 additional consultants, and launched a marketing campaign that positioned them as innovative leaders in business optimization. Within 6 months, they were competing for contracts they'd only dreamed about before. Marcus's role in the company expanded dramatically. His insights about scaling operations suddenly had the resources to be implemented. His innovative approaches to client relations could be supported with proper technology and staffing. Within a year, he was promoted to senior partner, his salary had tripled, and he was being invited to industry conferences as a thought leader. But success changed Marcus in ways that broke my heart. The man who had once asked thoughtful questions about my business began dismissing it as a cute hobby. The husband who had helped me negotiate complex contracts started explaining basic business concepts to me like I was a child. The partner who had admired my work ethic began introducing me at events as simply my wife, without mentioning my name or accomplishments. It started subtly. Comments about how my little fabric business was charming compared to his real corporate consulting. Suggestions that I might want to consider selling rosewood and focusing on supporting his career instead. Dismissive responses when I tried to discuss my own business challenges or successes. "You wouldn't understand the complexity of what I do now," became his standard response to my attempts at conversation about his work. Corporate consulting isn't like running a family business. This is high-stakes decision-making with Fortune 500 companies. The irony was devastating. The high-stakes consulting he was so proud of was funded entirely by profits from my little fabric business. The Fortune 500 companies he was advising were companies I supplied materials to through Rosewood's luxury contracts. The business expansion he took credit for was made possible by my investment, routed through financial structures I had established. But Marcus genuinely seemed to believe his success was entirely self-generated. He gave interviews about his innovative leadership and strategic vision. He wrote articles about attracting investment through compelling business presentations. He spoke at conferences about building competitive advantages in consulting markets. He never once mentioned that his wife might understand business strategy, because in his mind, I was just the woman who had inherited a small textile company and was keeping it afloat through family loyalty rather than business acumen. The night of Henderson and Associates' annual celebration, Marcus had been particularly condescending about my role at the event. "This is the biggest night of my career, Elena," he said as we drove to the Grandview Hotel. "Pacific Manufacturing CEO will be there, along with executives from 3 other major potential clients. These are serious business leaders who make decisions worth millions of dollars." He adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror, checking his appearance with the narcissistic precision I'd come to recognize and despise. "I need you to understand that tonight isn't about us as a couple," he continued. "It's about my professional reputation. Look beautiful, smile when appropriate, and let me handle all business conversations. Don't try to contribute unless someone directly asks you a question, and even then, keep your answers brief." The Grandview Hotel was everything Marcus loved about his new status. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves serving champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. He worked the room like he owned it, accepting congratulations for Henderson and Associates' record-breaking year with the practiced humility of someone who genuinely believed he deserved all the credit. I watched him hold court near the bar, explaining to a group of potential clients how his leadership had revolutionized the company's approach to business development. He was describing strategies that came directly from consultations I had funded, using market research I had paid for, implementing technology upgrades my investment had made possible. The key was recognizing that traditional consulting models were too reactive, he was saying to Robert Chen, the CEO of Pacific Manufacturing. "My approach focuses on proactive optimization, identifying efficiency opportunities before they become problems." Everything he was describing came from methodologies we had discussed at home, strategies I had suggested based on my own experience scaling rosewood fabrics. But in Marcus's version of events, these insights were his original innovations, proof of his exceptional business vision. Robert Chen looked impressed. The speed of Henderson and Associates' growth has been remarkable, Marcus. Most consulting firms take decades to achieve this kind of market position. How did you manage to scale so efficiently? Marcus's eyes lit up with the opportunity to impress. It was all about presenting the right vision to investors, Robert. When financial backing sees real leadership and genuine innovation, they're eager to support expansion. I personally convinced several major investment groups that Henderson and Associates represented the future of business consulting. That's when something inside me finally broke. 3 years of watching him take credit for growth my money had funded. 3 years of being dismissed as too unsophisticated to understand real business. 3 years of my investment being attributed to his persuasive abilities and leadership vision. That's interesting, I said quietly, stepping closer to their conversation circle. Which investment groups specifically? Marcus's jaw tightened with familiar annoyance. Elena, this is complicated corporate finance. Nothing you'd need to worry about. Try me, I said, maintaining eye contact with Robert Chen, who looked curious about the tension he was witnessing. I'm more familiar with business investment than you might realize. The group had grown quiet, sensing something significant happening, but unable to identify exactly what. Elena, Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying a warning that anyone paying attention would recognize as threatening. This isn't the time or place for you to pretend you understand complex financial arrangements. Richard Henderson had noticed the commotion and moved closer to our group, his expression concerned. Other party guests were starting to pay attention, drawn by the obvious tension between Marcus and me. That's when I smiled and asked the question that would destroy his carefully constructed image forever. Marcus, do you know who Rosewood Capital Management is? His face went completely blank. He clearly had no idea. They're the investment firm that provided the $15 million capital injection that transformed Henderson and Associates 3 years ago. I continued, pulling out my phone. The anonymous investors you've been crediting for your company's success. Robert Chen's eyebrows rose. Rosewood Capital? I've heard of them. Very selective, very strategic investors. They only fund companies with exceptional growth potential. That's absolutely right, I said, opening my banking app and turning the screen toward the group. And I should know, because I am Rosewood Capital Management. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice clinking in glasses across the ballroom. Marcus stared at the screen displaying the account balance for Rosewood Capital Management, with my name as the primary account holder and a transaction history showing exactly when and how the funds had been transferred to Henderson and Associates. What are you talking about? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm talking about the $15 million I invested in your company, Marcus. The money that paid for your technology upgrades, your additional staff, your marketing budget, your expansion into new markets. The investment that made your promotion possible, that funded your salary increase, that created the success you've been taking credit for. Richard Henderson had gone pale, clearly recognizing the implications of what I was revealing. The wife you've been dismissing as too stupid to understand real business, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the growing crowd of onlookers, is the anonymous investor who made your entire career possible. Marcus's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as he began to understand what this meant for his reputation, his career, his carefully constructed identity. You, he breathed. Me, I confirmed. The woman with the little fabric business who you think doesn't understand complex corporate finance is the person who provided the strategic investment that transformed Henderson and Associates from a struggling regional firm into the national consulting powerhouse you're so proud of. The crowd around us had grown substantially as other party guests noticed the commotion. I could see phones being pulled out, people starting to record what was clearly becoming a significant confrontation. That's when Marcus completely lost control. The humiliation, the shock, the complete destruction of his professional image, it all came out in a moment of pure, unfiltered rage. "You set me up," he shouted, his voice carrying across the entire ballroom. "You deliberately humiliated me in front of my colleagues." "I didn't set you up, Marcus," I replied calmly. "I funded your success, and you chose to take credit for it while treating me like I was intellectually inferior." He raised his hand and struck me across the face with such force that I stumbled backward into a cocktail table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking crystal was nothing compared to the collective gasp from 50 witnesses who had just watched a senior business executive physically assault his wife at a corporate function. "That's what you get for running your mouth," he snarled, his face twisted with the kind of rage that revealed who he really was beneath his professional facade. "I told you to stay quiet tonight and let me handle the business talk." But instead of the shocked silence he might have expected, Marcus found himself facing something much worse: the horrified stares of everyone whose professional respect he had worked years to earn, now realizing they had just witnessed him assault the woman who had made his career possible. Richard Henderson stepped forward, his face grim with understanding and barely contained fury. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just realized his company's reputation was in serious jeopardy, "you just physically assaulted the investor whose money built everything we've achieved over the past 3 years." "She's my wife," Marcus said desperately, looking around for support that was nowhere to be found. "This is a private matter between us." "No," Robertson said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is assault and battery, committed in front of 50 witnesses, against a person who funded this company's growth." "Security." As hotel security approached through the crowd, I straightened my dress and addressed the room with the kind of calm authority that comes from actually holding power rather than just pretending to possess it. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a celebration of Henderson and Associates' achievements," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "My investment in the company was intended to remain anonymous, but circumstances have forced me to reveal my involvement. I trust you understand that domestic violence has no place in any business environment, and I hope this incident won't reflect poorly on Henderson and Associates' other executives and employees." The next morning brought consequences that cascaded through Marcus's life like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Richard Henderson called an emergency board meeting at 7 a.m., where I attended via video conference from my lawyer's office. The decision was unanimous and swift. Marcus was terminated immediately, not just for the assault, but for what the board classified as fraudulent misrepresentation of company achievements and investor relations. But my real revenge was just beginning. I presented Henderson and Associates with an ultimatum that would reshape not just Marcus's life, but the entire company's culture. Either the firm would implement comprehensive domestic violence prevention training for all employees, establish a zero-tolerance policy for workplace violence, donate 15% of annual profits to women's shelters, and create a scholarship program for female entrepreneurs, or I would withdraw my investment and watch the company collapse. The board voted unanimously to accept my terms within 20 minutes. Marcus's industry reputation was destroyed completely. The video of him striking me had gone viral on social media within hours, tagged with his name, his former company, and detailed explanations of how he had taken credit for achievements funded by his wife's investment. No reputable consulting firm would touch him. But the most satisfying part wasn't his professional downfall. It was discovering the broader impact of revealing the truth about power, success, and recognition. Over the following months, I received dozens of messages from other women in similar situations. Wives who had funded their husbands' businesses while being treated as intellectually inferior. Female entrepreneurs whose male partners had taken credit for their innovations. Women who had been dismissed and undermined by men whose success depended entirely on their contributions. 3 of these women ended up becoming clients of Rosewood Fabrics, and 2 others received funding from the expanded investment arm of Rosewood Capital Management that I established specifically to support female-owned businesses. The scholarship program I forced Henderson and Associates to create funded education for 47 women in its first year alone. The domestic violence prevention training became a model that other companies began implementing voluntarily. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a handwritten letter that made everything worthwhile. Dear Ms. Moretti, it began, my name is Sarah Chin, and I'm the daughter of Robert Chin, who witnessed your husband's assault at the Henderson and Associates event. My father told me your story, and it inspired me to start my own business instead of joining my boyfriend's company as an unpaid partner. I wanted you to know that watching you reveal your power taught me that I don't have to hide mine. Thank you for showing me that the most dangerous thing you can be to someone who underestimates you is exactly who you are. She was absolutely right. Marcus had spent 3 years dismissing me as irrelevant while I quietly controlled his professional destiny. He learned too late that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It just acts when the moment is right. The man who slapped me in front of 50 people discovered that the unsophisticated wife he had been condescending to was the investor who held his future in her hands. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't elaborate planning or dramatic schemes. It's simply allowing people to face the consequences of underestimating you. And sometimes, justice looks like a woman who builds an empire while everyone is looking the other way, then chooses exactly the right moment to remind them who is really in charge all along. What's the most shocking reveal of hidden power you've ever witnessed? Share your stories in the comments below. I love reading about moments when the truth changes everything. If this tale of secret influence and public justice resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories where consequences meet karma. Remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be holding all the cards while you think you're winning the game.